Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday when I'm recording this. Um, this is kind of an off-the-cuff video, but I wanted to address something that's been on my mind in terms of Judaism. So, if Judaism doesn't interest you, then absolutely feel free to click away. But there's a big issue that I've seen lately, and that is with how Orthodox Jews treat matrilineal descent and their assertion that the lineage must only come from the mother. And I'm going to present a case, and then I'm going to go through the Chabad uh, article, I suppose you would call it, on the issue, and we're going to go through and we're going to go through why, in my opinion, it's maybe a harsh opinion, but I think it's quite honestly ridiculous. Um, And so we're going to go through it here. So first, before we go through this article, let me present to you um, their biggest reason. So as this article first starts, the biggest and only reason that they have in the entirety of the Tanakh is in Ezra. And in Ezra, basically, uh, as you can read here, and feel free to look this up online and to actually go through these articles. I'll leave links in the description. Um, and definitely read through Ezra chapter 10, and later we'll go through Deuteronomy as well. But basically, uh, Shechaniah is saying, okay, these Israelite men are transgressing by being with foreign women. And what that meant back then, if we go to Deuteronomy, is there's a passage in Deuteronomy where um, Hashem is giving a commandment that when they take down the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, that not to intermarry with the women because they will lead the men astray to worship idols and lead them away from Hashem, and they're gonna fall into idolatry. And we see that. We see that many times throughout the Torah and throughout the entirety of the Tanakh. We see it with King Solomon, and we see it with many people. So the reason for not intermarrying with these women were was because it would lead the men astray, and they would go and worship other gods. Um, the Chabad article tries to give other reasons for it as well, and tries to tie it into matrilineal descent and say, oh, it's because Judaism doesn't pass through the mother, or doesn't pass through the father. It only passes through the mother. And we're gonna go through it, and we're gonna prove why that's false. So that's just context on why Shechaniah was saying you guys are transgressing by having these foreign wives. So what do they do? So he ends up having all of the priests and stuff make a covenant to essentially um, separate these men from their foreign wives, and they basically send the women as well as their children away. Where is it? It's right. Yeah, let us make a covenant with our God to expel all these women and those who have been born to them in accordance with the bidding of the Lord and of all those who are concerned over the commandment of our God, and let the teaching be obeyed. The teaching, of course, referring to Deuteronomy. Um, so what that's saying is they're sending the women away with their children. This Chabad article right here, it quotes it right here, and it says, um, here, let me make my face a little smaller so you can read it. You don't need to see my face. Okay. Um, it quotes the verse. Now let us make a covenant to expel all these women and those who have been born to them. It makes the assertion if the oh, sorry, I just refreshed. What is going on? Okay. Sorry. If the child of a Jewish father is Jewish, why did Shechaniah suggest expulsion of the children born to these women? How was it that Ezra and all the people agreed to this advice? To his advice, Jewish people historically were greatly attached to their children. How is it they agreed to send them away? Now, if you'll notice here, this follows a pattern within this article specifically. And I implore you, please read the article yourself. It contradicts itself so much. So, right here it makes the point. Jewish people were historically greatly attached to their children. How is it that they agreed to send them away? You assume back then most people were of the same culture and of the same style. Why would you not send a child with their mother? A child, and it says this later down the line, that a child is much more connected to the mother. Again, this article self defeats itself a lot, but the why if you were to send a woman away who has a child, would you leave them with the father or leave them with the mother? I think the compassionate thing to do, especially when we're dealing with thousands of years ago, we're dealing with you didn't have the same resources back then. You didn't have baby formula, you didn't have all this. So of course you would send the child away with the mother. That if we're using Occam's razor, that is the most reasonable answer to why would you send a child away from the mother. And I implore anybody who's watching this video um, to make a good counter argument as to why the assumption that instead of the assumption of the mother should be with their child or the child should be with their mother being more reasonable than making a blanket assumption that all Jewish people are only Jewish um, because of their mother. That that's to me is a wild conclusion to come to when there's a much more reasonable conclusion to come to. Um, Now, this article tries to address some of the counterpoints that I'm going to present to you, but it doesn't do it very well. So some of the counterpoints. Uh, Yosef had two children who became tribes of Israel, and they're two tribes who came from um, what's her name? Asenat. She was the daughter of Potipharah, which was a pagan priest. He was a priest in Egypt of a pagan god. So this woman clearly was not Jewish, but he has children with her, and they are considered the founding of one of the Jewish tribes, or two of the Jewish tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. So we have that, and this article does try to address that. Let's see. It's in this article somewhere. Please read the article. Maybe you can find stuff that I haven't. Um, but it is in this article here. This is the part in the article where they try to reference Deuteronomy, but they try to attach it to matrilineal descent, but that's clearly, clearly not what the verse meant. But let's find. Yes, so they try to address some stuff. So did Moses marry out? Moshe, did he marry out? And basically they tried to make the assertion that, oh, the Torah wasn't given yet, so these laws didn't apply. But if it's something like matrilineal descent of is your soul Jewish, that shouldn't matter whether the Torah law was in effect or um, whether the Torah was given or not. I mean, I mean, if we go through like what a Jew is, there's many different opinions in Judaism. You have like the spiritual side, who thinks a Jew is a Jewish soul, but whether the Torah laws were in effect or not shouldn't matter. And thankfully, it doesn't, because later on you have people like Rehoboam, you have many of David's children. This article also addresses that, but it does it very poorly, and we're going to yeah, so it addresses it here, but for David and Solomon, the answer does not work. And so they try to make an answer here. And this is the kicker, because this blew my mind with the mental gymnastics they got to justify this. So or to come to the conclusion that they came to. Um, so they say, if there was no conversion and a clear abrogation of divine law, where is the outrage in the text? So Yeah, so they start saying, besides the story of Pinchas and the Midianite woman, also, I'm a little all over the place, so please read it yourself. I'm just presenting to you uh my perspective. So basically their assertion is that all of the children so my understanding, all the children who were born to non-Jewish women went through a conversion. They just and it's never talked about or explained. It never had to be. It's just you should just assume while reading the Torah and the Tanakh that whoever was born to non-Jewish women is just they went through a conversion. And they use this really hilarious analogy here. Um, so they talk about how there's a lot involved in a conversion. A woman would have to immerse in a mikvah, as you can see here. Uh, I'll zoom in actually. Um, and accept the covenant for 3 Jews. A man would require circumcision. When possible, an offering was brought to the temple. Ritual immersion, circumcision, offerings. These were all everyday practices for all Jews to be taken for granted. And then they use this analogy, which is very self-defeating, and it's kind of funny. They say, let's say we would write, and Vicky York went to Harvard and received her doctorate in sociology. We don't need to write that Vicky wrote a thesis and defended it. The contemporary reader understands that as obvious. Similarly, it would be superfluous for the Hebrew Bible to account all details of how any person became part of our convental people. Convenital people. The reader, being a member of that covenant, understands. It's funny because so their explanation here is then Vicky York went to Harvard and received her doctorate in sociology. We don't need to write that Vicky wrote a thesis and defended it. So using their own example, the Tanakh would say, and their children converted. They wouldn't have to include that the woman went in the mikvah and before 3 Jews and a man would require circumcision and there was an offering brought. Their own analogy makes it so because under their logic, it would just say, and Vicky York, I guess, and Vicky York went to Harvard, and then they would say, well, you should assume she got a doctorate in sociology. If the Tanakh wanted to say a child converted, it could very much say a child converted. So it's very possible that they did. It's possible that they did convert, but their analogy does not connect to that logic in the slightest. And basically, that's kind of all I wanted to go over. There's a lot more in this article. They talk about Jewish resilience. They talk about how connected to the mother Jews are, or that babies in general are. That babies are really connected to their mothers. So obviously, we should take biologically that they would be Jewish, which defeats the purpose for the point from earlier. Because if babies are so connected to their mother, wouldn't the reasonable conclusion in Ezra be that the children accompanied their mother because children are connected to their mother, not because of how Jewish they were? So that's my argument. I think it's a little ridiculous that I'm going to switch gears here to a more personal anecdote from my experience in Orthodox Judaism. So I was lucky enough to have my Judaism come matrilineally through my mother. So I didn't have to deal personally with that exclusionary culture, but I witnessed it a lot. And I had Jews who didn't like me in the synagogue always question my Judaism, and they would grill me and ask me questions and say, "Oh, but who was her mother and who was her mother?" And it really upset me to see somebody who wanted to be Jewish. I would see people, they would join the synagogue and they want to be Jewish so badly, and they would be shunned by other Jews because they weren't real Jews. And so I started questioning, where does this come from? Why do they say that Judaism only comes from the mother? And it's literally one verse in Ezra where they say, send the children away with their mothers. And it kind of blew my mind. And I did a lot of research. This entire article just always references Ezra over and over again. It says, oh, as we see in Ezra, they believe this. when that's not even what the verse in Ezra says. So I found it quite ridiculous, and I found it very important that I make this video. It's around 15 minutes long already of me just rambling when I could probably cut it down, but this is my first time doing this, so give me a break here. Um, but yeah, that's about all I have to say about that. Um, there was something else I wanted to say, but I don't remember. So, anyways, thank you. Thank you for watching. I hope somebody can enlighten me as to any other source or any other reason. Um, I remember what I was going to say. I have a theory as to why culturally Judaism was only coming from the mother. And I think, here's what I think happened. I think they had this culture before they attributed it to Ezra. I think the culture existed before DNA testing. So they weren't always sure who the father was. So if a woman cheated on her husband, and that woman wasn't Jewish, but the father was assumed Jewish, then that child, without knowing for certain that that child was from the Jewish father, it was better to play it safe and say, let's only treat people who are Jewish through the mother. Because if that mother cheats on somebody, or if she's assaulted, or something happens, and the father is somebody else who's not Jewish, then that could create a lot of confusion. Um, so I think personally, my theory is that that began as a failsafe or as a fence or a protection against a mix-up between who the father is. You'll always know who the mother is, but you sometimes are unsure who the father is. So I think that's where that originated, and then I think people, the rabbis and our great sages in the Talmud, they tried to create reasons for that, and the only thing they could find was in Ezra, and I think that's why that's the only thing they cling on to. So yeah, that's my theory. That's my little crackpot theory. Um, anyways, I thought it was important to put this video out, and I hope maybe it offers everybody a different perspective on it. Anyways, thank you so much, and may you have an amazing week. Ciao.